moving on next, we plan to explore more about what young people think, what their understanding is, and try and do an attempt to understand more about what we can do in response to encourage them to be included in the discussion. And Mano, this is definitely where I need your help, because I know that you've been talking to young people lately, right?
Yeah, thanks, Aja. Absolutely. We've found out a lot about what young people think about climate change. And we've done this through policy dialogues, thought leadership pieces, impact evaluations, and research projects. And we'll find out more throughout the event on some of that work. But what I'd like to focus on is the global youth letter research and the 8,000 Rising campaign. Okay. And this really supported the UK government's ambition to make COP26 the most inclusive ever. And this is a real focus of the work. And a key message that really came out was that there was a strong, unanimous voice from young people on climate change, and that by only creating a youth platform and us working all together, can we really mitigate the effects of climate change. And you'll see there that we've had 8,000 research participants as part of the Global Youth Letter research. And there was a mixed methodology, so surveys, focus groups, interviews, and some really interesting key findings there. The first one, you can see 75% of young people around the world report having skills to deal with climate change in their communities. So a real kind of confidence on their skills. But only 69% have never participated in climate action. So, what does that really tell us? Yeah. That there's a kind of untapped potential there, and that we really need targeted capacity building and skills development to really address that. Also, and we've talked about inclusion, but it was really important that this research was as representative as possible in terms of gender, background, socioeconomic status, and to really hear voices that are traditionally overlooked, so young people with disabilities, minority groups, and Indigenous communities. And what came out was that there's a real concern that voices of women and minority groups are overlooked in climate change policy. And also linked to policy, 67% of young people feel leaders, can't address climate change on their own, and that there needs to be, young people need to be involved in policy decisions. And later in the panel, we're going to be hearing from some young people who are involved in policy. So it would be great to hear from them on what more can be done. So this was the research, but the research informed writing a global youth letter, which was a plan of action representing views and recommendations from young people. And it was addressed to world leaders and policymakers. And there were 18 recommendations, as well as calls to action from the 23 participating countries. And some of those recommendations, you can see we're focusing on 3. So by involving young people, you're really getting ideas that are innovative, and you're reaching more people. And we'll see that from some of our Climate Connection projects later. I've mentioned skills development, so a real need to address the issue of that lack of access. So whether it's literature, whether it's resources, whether it's climate education in schools, it's about really addressing that. And also what came out from young people was the power of digital connections and thinking about connecting with peers on social media, countering disinformation, but also we've talked about inclusion, but addressing the digital divide, because not everyone has access. So, that was the Global Youth Letter research.
I mean, extremely interesting. And you mean 18 recommendations, 23 countries that were involved. It's super specific and super concrete. I mean, I'm super curious to hear from you, Mono. How did this initiative develop? Like, what did you guys do with the Global Youth Letter?
Absolutely.
In the process?
Well, 8,000 voices was impressive in terms of that representation. But what we wanted to do, especially in the build-up to COP, was to get more young people talking and really make the conversation accessible. So we developed a campaign which was called 8,000 Rising. So, to add to those 8,000 rising voices. And 32,000 was the output in terms of how many people contributed to the Global Youth Letter and to the 8,000 Rising campaign. And from 23 countries, the campaign actually heard from people from 98 countries, and they were encouraged to add their reflections and their pledges. And it was really interesting looking at the analysis. It was analysed in terms of commitments, concerns, and actions. And what really came through in the 8,000 Rising campaign was that young people said that they were personally committed to making changes in their daily lives, and that came through really strongly. And there was a lot of regional variation as well, but again, the key message was that young people, their concern over climate change really united young people, and that transcended context, cultural context, regional and social context. And I think we've got some examples as well from different priorities. So in Indonesia, what came through was caring for future generations and thinking about biodiversity. In Bangladesh, a key concern was air pollution and extreme weather. Brazil, really interesting, the use of water, using water as efficiently as possible, and this was in line with the region. And also 85% of all global pledges to eat less meat came from the Americas.
Wow,
so yeah, really interesting. Egypt, where COP27 is being hosted later this year, again, reinforcing that need for urgency to get action. And again, with Turkey, just reinforcing that inclusive approach of young people from across the country getting involved.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we also have some young people on standby, right?
I know, I hope so. Yeah. Hopefully, there's Umesh. Hello, Umesh. So I was fortunate enough to meet Umesh at Glasgow at the UN's Conference of Youth and COP26. And Umesh is a really inspiring youth leader based in Nepal, coordinator for climate action groups. So Umesh, lovely to see you. And I've got a question for you, which is, why is inclusive climate action so important to you?
Yeah, hello, hi everybody. Thank you so much, Monomita ji, for such beautiful words and introduction, and nice to meet you again, although it's virtually. Yeah, firstly, talking about my passion, why I am taking this climate action so much passionately, because I am inspired in the climate action with so many people, but I have been motivated by myself to engage in this climate action because I am vulnerable to the climate change disaster and being a different level. I am here speaking on climate action, not only because I am differently able, but I am here speaking on the climate action because I have seen so much climate disaster so closely, how hard the life is for the people who are really vulnerable, how hard the life for them, and they are not even though included in the decision maker or anything in the discussion table, but they are in the front line of climate change disaster. In past, I am 26-year old, but I have almost 2 decades of experience that how each and every day is hard for the people who are in the front line or who are in the vulnerable due to the climate change disaster, and they are not even, the old is for the normal people, but they are not even in the decision making table, or they are not in the planning sector because their position are not taking in the planning, or their position are not taking the decision, but they are in the front line. So I am taking this issue so much passionately, so we can be heard, so that I can lead their voice as in the front line, and so their voice can be heard, not only to be heard, but their voice will be respected, respected in more inclusion for the climate justice. So excluded will be the heard and respected. And I think 8,000 Rising climate concern campaign for 8,000 Rising is so important, and I am glad to be part of this campaign because from this campaign, I think we can include some of the voice of the youth, that they will be heard and they will be included on this campaign. And moreover, I think the old leader will be heard us. Not only it is not heading to some particular person or some particular individual. It is heading to the community or who are excluded or who are not been able to heard till now. However, they are being getting the chance, but they are not being as much as capacitated, and they are not doing the good for the youth, for the active engagement due to the lack of so many things. So yes, that's why it is so much important to be gave heard or to be respected. Yes,
Thanks so much, Umesh. And it was so inspiring to meet you, and all that you're doing as well for disability rights, and a really important point there that is thinking about vulnerable communities. So thank you very much for your insight, and hope to see you again very soon. We're now going to move over to Tuan, and actually Tuan has been part of British Council Youth and Climate Programmes, I think, for the past 10 years. And the question for you is, how did you get young people involved in the 8,000 Rising campaign, and why was that important to you?
Thank you, Mono, and very nice to meet you again, and Umesh as well. So in Vietnam, we got about nearly 8,000 young people supporting us in the campaign. And then I was preparing the presentations, very long presentation, but when I think back, it's all about making connections. When we do the campaigns, we try to make climate connect with young people by thinking what are the interests of young people, what are the things that they see, what are the things that they want to understand. To that, we know that we have to go on social media, using social media as a means to reach out to young people. From that, for example, we have a TikTok channel, and we reach a million people view for the first 2 weeks, talking about climate change only. And secondly, young people love artists, music, so that's why we partner with an MTV awarded artist in Vietnam. He has millions of followers, young followers, and then we partner with him, we talk with him, and use his influence to reach out to his young fans and influence them, and then convince them to look at our campaign and support us. And lastly, we tried to reach out to community leaders, young people in different communities, and asking them to help us to translate the global youth letter into 6 different languages, including ethnic minority languages, to ensure that everyone had access to climate change, and then the message, not only the people who has social media, who has smartphone, but people in the rural areas. And we also reach out to different people, policymakers, schools, media, artists. And it's all about making connections. And then that's also the reason why I think it is very important, because we need everybody to get on board with us, to work together for climate. And also we need everyone to join hands together to support young people to make change. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was so powerful and really impressive. And I think just inspiring as well for ideas. Amazing connections. Yeah, that was great.
Truly. And I mean, also, hearing from Tuan and from Umesh, I loved how they re-emphasized, that young people really are at the front lines of both the movement, but also the people tackling it, experiencing it. And, as Tuan has said at the end, it's also important that we speak about, how we get this message across also to young people that might not have, easy access to these sorts of communication channels. And if I can say, Mono, you mentioned 32,000 people that you reached. Yeah. I mean, it goes to say, I think it's a big congratulations to you guys, because it's extremely impactful what you've done. And I mean, looking ahead now, you have this big momentum, and we also have COP27 coming up rather soon as well. How are you taking that into account with each other?
Yeah. Well, as you said, Haja, I mean, youth engagement is really at the center of all our work, and we're really proud to have supported young people to make their case, to people in charge. And that's what we're carrying on doing to ensure that, there are events. And an example of that is just recently, as part of the Stronger Together series in partnership with the Africa-Europe Foundation, we organised a youth-led policy forum where they actually still discuss the Global Youth Letter, but really thinking about the priorities for COP27. So a real springboard. And I think we're going to see a clip from that event.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Dear policymakers.
Dear fellow Earthlings.
We live in times where unfortunately scientists are struggling to separate the so-called fake news, so gathering real data is crucial.
And sustainable production is relatively more costly. So governments should help entrepreneurs in sustainable production through tax breaks.
We don't get to see our research outputs translated into public knowledge, policy, and implementation. We need to ensure that they are curricula from early on in the educational system. We need to be trained in what are the best and most efficacious ways to translate and communicate our research outputs.
Great, and we're going to be finding out more about that event actually from Chahaiya, who's going to be one of our panelists later. Yes. So, you know, we really haven't been wasting any time in, you know, generating momentum, and I think working with our partners all around the world as well through advocacy and events. And you know, examples of that is, you know, we worked alongside the FCDO and with the Italian government for the Youth for Climate Summit, where we co-facilitated all non-state actors group. And also our Global Youth Letter was launched globally as part of the All for Climate campaign, and 4,000 people registered. Wow. So again, really gaining that momentum. And also our partnership with YOUNGO, you know, supported the Conference of Youth and to carry on discussing findings and thinking about what's needed. And the Youth Manifesto and the Youth Statement were actually presented at COP26 to our COP President, Alok Sharma. And you can see there the Global Youth Letter was presented by some of our green scholars who are part of the Great Scholarship campaign in partnership with the UK government, and they presented the Global Youth Letter to Prince Charles. We're going to hear from some of our green scholars as well later. Yeah. And also the Global Youth Letter was presented to the President of Sri Lanka as well. So really just thinking about advocacy, influence, as well as debating it in our network of over 100 offices. Right. So in terms of what now, you know, we really need to look at what those gaps and recommendations were and think about that insight and thinking about the demands and the needs for young people and what we can do. And we've got a number of research projects underway at the moment, looking at you know, supporting young people on climate action, access to green jobs, you know, just transition. And at the moment, an example of this is happening in ASEAN at the moment. Yeah. And we've also got, we're in designing a new non-formal education, a global program, and we hope that, you know, positive pathways and leadership, you know, is you know, going to be addressed. And we look forward to continuing to support YOUNGO and a new climate negotiators youth program as well, and you'll hear more about that from Heeta, one of our panelists later. So a lot going on. And we want to keep that momentum going. And also, today's going to be a really great opportunity to hear from everyone else on priorities.
And celebrate more of these instances, right?
Absolutely.
But it's amazing to hear. I mean, everything that you guys already done, but also the fact that, you know, as you just mentioned, you've got so many other projects coming up. So thank you so much for that, Mono. And I mean, you've covered a lot already. But let's finish this section with a film which explains even more what the team at the British Council does. So let's take a look.
So content, clarity and charisma, that's what we're looking for.
Look around. Intense heat waves in Europe, frequent wildfire in America, Australia, loss of sea ice and rising sea level are all the results of climate change.
I think we can actually prevent the climate change
We must rebuild and restore our ecosystem.
A tiny little pellet like this has the same energy as 1 ton of coal.
And the carbon emissions? 0.
Yes, undisturbed and unbothered.
Climate crisis or climate action?
The solution is jute. Yes.
Earthworms literally move the earth, and when it comes to global warming and climate action, they need to be part of the discussion.
Amazing, isn't it?
The Back Lab looks at waste plastic and sees beautiful projects like the Bokashi bin. Bokashi will compost food waste in just 30 days and doesn't even smell bad.
The Gallant helped us to buy molding machine which improved our productivity by the factor of 2.
As one of the winners in COP26 Innovation Challenge, we got a grant which was spent on the conduction of pilot tests.
I mean, there we go. I mean, so much to take in. And to help make sense of what we know and start to explore responses, we're joined by a stellar panel of real experts in empowering youth and cultural relations in action. First off, we're joined here in the studio by Phoebe Hansen, who is an environmental campaigner and politics student from Lancaster University, who was involved in climate education initiatives at COP26. So, Phoebe, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And then we are also joined by Mahendra Gooroochurn, who is an ACU climate research member who joins us from the University of Mauritius today. So a big warm welcome to you as well, Mahendra. It's nice to see you here with us. Cool. Then we also have Chahaiya Pilkington. She is from the Africa Europe Foundation in Brussels. And we will also be joined by Heeta Lakhani, who is the 2020-2021 YOUNGO Focal Point for the Global South. So a warm welcome to both of you. Now, we are also delighted to be joined by two Climate Connection Green scholars. We have Lamis and Lidya, who are currently in our exhibition center. So it's great to have you both here as well with us. And now, maybe for those of you who don't know what being a green scholar is all about, I can tell you it's extremely cool. Maybe we can get Lidya and Lamis to tell us a little more about, how they became involved and what it is that they actually do in their work.
Hi Hajar. Firstly, thank you for all the participation and of course to the British Council for having us here. I'm Lidya and I'm studying environmental management for business at Cranfield University. When I was doing my internship in Turkey, I realized that I was more involved and interested with social sustainability projects. And I want to do something not only for my country, for the whole world, and Great Scholarship gave me that opportunity. With my master's, I gained a point of view that business ecosystems do not always need to seek profit. Right now, companies' engagement and relationship with the stakeholders, it's critical because we are more conscious and more questioning than before. With the different backgrounds and cultures, we great scholars are committed and making everyone part of the conversation to learn and engage together to make a common act.
My name is Lamis. I'm studying environmental futures with climate change this year at the University of Essex. I'm an environmental urbanist. So in my previous studies, I was told that I can do everything in my project, but I may face some obstacles when trying to implement it because of the policies. So that's why I wanted to study politics to know the obstacles I will be facing and to be more prepared to act for them. So we as green scholars, we all came from different disciplines, but we share the same purpose. We wanted to realize our true potential, as we believe that when actions come from a place of knowledge and passion, it will lead to wise yet huge positive impacts on our community and planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Lidya and Lamis for sharing that with us. And I love how you said, you're all coming from different disciplines, but then at the same time, all engaged with this same purpose to get, climate action out there all together. So thank you. And Phoebe, if I can turn to you, you are also, like them, a powerful young voice yourself. And I mean, all the great work that you've done, I'm really curious, if we're starting at the basics, why would you say that it is so important that we include young people into these conversations and topics?
Well, I mean, it's important because we have a right to participate in public affairs, and because we care about our future. I have had the weight on my shoulders of the climate crisis for as long as I can remember, and I'm not the only one that feels that. I remember there was a survey in The Independent that said as children as young as 7 were having nightmares about climate change. Yeah. And that must be tenfold for young people from the Global South who are on the front lines of this crisis. And we deserve to hold leaders and people who have power in this situation's feet to the fire on this. We deserve to be included in those rooms. We deserve to be in those conversations. We deserve to be heard meaningfully and not just as a tweet about how inspiring we are. We deserve to be heard as a meaningful part of that conversation. And that's not just because we deserve to be there as a right to participate in public affairs. It's also because we're valuable in that conversation, because young people can be experts, because young people are innovative, as we were saying earlier. Young people are really valuable in this conversation because we haven't been in those rooms for decades. We haven't been jaded by decades of the same conversations. We're new and we're fresh, and we have new ideas to bring to the table, and we have a new set of urgency and ambitious targets. We are a good strategic decision to include at the table, and it's important on so many levels.
I love how you said that, and also how you touch upon like multiple facets of it, right? I mean, it's not just one argument case that you're presenting here, like so many things indeed. The fact that we're being, relatively more targeted by the climate crisis, but also, as you said, we're not rusted into these, you could say, structures that are already, existing for so long. So if we want to bring that system change, then we definitely are the ones to do it. Hey, and Phoebe, you also spoke at the at COP26 in this climate educational ministerial event, where new climate education pledges were made by numerous, educational ministers. How would you say that young people can help realize those sorts of ambitions?
I think there are so many ways that young people can help. I mean, the first thing would be to talk to their parents and their teachers about those fears, about climate change, to talk to them and help them to understand the severity of how we feel about this crisis, and also talk to our teachers about how we want to be taught about climate change. My mum's a teacher. I was having a conversation with her about this last night, and she was like, well, the issue is not just that teachers don't understand the science of climate change if that's not their specialism. It's also because we don't understand how to integrate it into their subjects, because we don't understand how it applies to different disciplines. That's also the issue here. And I think that's what's really important there, is that when we talk about climate education, when we talk about young people, we're particularly talking about children, and it can never really truly be the fault and the responsibility of children to be designing and implementing their own climate education, because that's the system that we have established now. Yeah. I have experience of very dire climate education in school. I wasn't really given any climate education in school, and my climate education was a page in a textbook. And I also have experience of self-teaching myself my climate education, and I don't want that for young people. I don't want to put that pressure onto their shoulders of being the ones that are responsible for designing that future for themselves. It's also the responsibility of governments. It's also the responsibility of the Department for Education, who in the UK are planning this climate sustainability strategy that's going to be launched in a couple of weeks just before Earth Day, or on Earth Day, I think. And that's really, really important. It's really important to be talking to the decision makers and the schools and people that actually have power in these situations, who can work alongside young people to co-design what they want their education to look like in a way that's integrated, mandatory, and assessed across all subjects that it can be.
Right, and I mean, I think there are a lot of policymakers watching this, so I mean, all these insights being thrown around.
I think we're gonna, there's on the panel later, there's also going to be some experts who are going to be addressing this topic. So. Yeah,
definitely. But thank you so much for sharing, Phoebe. And I mean, Mahendra, I would also like to ask you, I mean, you've been conducting some research as well into the views of young people. Could you maybe share a little bit more on your findings?
Yeah, thank you, Haja. Thank you very much, Manu. So you mentioned actually in the video that we had this ACU Commonwealth Futures program, which I had the opportunity to work in, and we had a research to action project in there. And we the topic I chose was Youth Voice to COP26. So it was really about collecting the views of youth, their perspective, what they think about climate change. So it was run in Mauritius, but also across 5 Commonwealth countries, and we've got very similar results to what Manu presented earlier. So the youth actually are well educated, they are well conversant with climate change. When they find impacts in the communities, they know that this is related to climate change, so they are aware of it. But I think something we have to also pay attention in these surveys is people who are interested or already aware of climate change would tend to participate. So I would say there's also a big segment of our youth who are not yet maybe well conversant. So we need to also look into that aspect as well. As part of a survey, we've got very high awareness of climate change, because I would tend to say people who already know about climate change would participate in this type of survey. So this is something we need to be aware in this type of surveys. And also for the specific context of Mauritius, it was the youth knew, like, we have issues with extreme climate temperatures, with summer, which is soaring in temperature. We have issues with flooding. So they were well aware of that and be able to relate that to climate change effects. Now, when you look at COP26 and also generally about climate justice and climate change, we find this growing frustration, for example, in the youth. And I would say the main reason for that would be lack of grassroots action. So we find policies put in place where head of states will come forward and put forward policies, what they would do for the economies, but then we don't see this grassroots action taking place and how we convert these policies into concrete action. So this is where I think the frustration is. And as part of the research to action project, which I proposed for Mauritius, so this was really the center of my, the objective of really the project for me was how do we get the perspective of the youth and then be able to transmit that to a community and take practical action. So what I proposed was a project called Circular Home. So it really shows to the youth and empower them to just teach them about basic fundamentals of climate change and how it transmits to their home. And once they understand these impacts their home is having in terms of energy, water, and materials, how they can start taking action on their own. So I think this is a fundamental outcome of a research which I've undertaken was we need to be able to empower the community so they can co-create solutions, because the solution will not just come from head of states. They need to be co-created by community members. So as part of my own research interest in buildings and green buildings and homes, I could create a framework where the community doesn't need to have technical knowledge or advanced knowledge about this climate change, but they are able to take very simple actions at their home and be able to contribute. I think this is something we need to be able to do increasingly to empower the community. We have a tendency to tend to complicate climate change. Climate change is not complicated. It is taught at primary school. If you talk about water cycles or how plants generate oxygen, so it's a very simple very simple principles. But unfortunately, the tendency is to tend to complicate climate change and then say, yes, this is reserved for certain few researchers only. So I think this is something we need to really work on, to really show practically to the community how they can contribute.
Touches on the point you made, right, about that it might be a bubble still of people that are very actively engaged with it. And well, usually we say you want to break out of your bubble, but actually we want to get more people into this bubble because we all need to be working on this together. So I love how you mentioned it. And amazing, Mahendra, how you implemented the findings of your own research, you know, the frustration that people had because it wasn't grassroots focused enough, and you implemented that by, you know, getting this community to engage in this conversation about these green buildings. Thank you so much. We also have Chahaiya with us here. Chahaiya, it's so great to see you. I mean, you have also been at the center of efforts to give young people a voice. Could you maybe also tell us a bit more about the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be part of this discussion and also a pleasure to present some of the activities that have been taking place over the last 6 months. So as you mentioned earlier, I work for the Africa Europe Foundation. It's a relatively new organization that was essentially established to bring the Africa Europe partnership out into the open beyond just the institutions and to really catalyze new partnerships and unlock new opportunities to transform the Africa Europe partnership kind of from dialogue into action. So part of the work that we've been doing in partnership with the British Council is specifically targeted at youth. We know that youth makes up a huge portion of the population in Africa, and it's also it's a central theme in our work as it's essentially the future of how the Africa-Europe partnership is going to relate to itself. So with the British Council, in the context of COP26, moving on to the Africa-Europe Summit, which then took place in February, and of course with COP27, which is going to be taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So it's going to be essentially an African COP. We undertook a series of activities to look more into reinforcing youth voice, agency, and their leadership, and obviously hearing a little bit more about their reactions to the Global Youth Letter, which Mono presented earlier, and some of those findings, but also understanding it more from the perspective of the Africa-Europe partnership and its specific lens. So over the course of 6 months, we took part in 3 focus groups with young entrepreneurs, researchers, and as well artists from both continents, from a geographical diverse group, so be it East Africa, West Africa, but equally Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Southern Europe, to really come together in an intercontinental exchange about some of these, some of their perspectives around climate. And we actually found that although all of them come from a very unique perspective in this discussion, there are some main conclusions that we can really draw from the work that they did and from the conversations that they had. So one of the first ones is, of course, and this is something that we hear consistently in youth dialogues, is that young people want a seat at the table. But I also want to go to what Mahendra was saying. There have to be more seats available and accessible to a wider range of young people from both continents. And this is why, this is because of course, when we have to design policies around climate, they need to be needs-based, they need to be co-created, and of course, co-led all the way from their inception to their delivery and implementation. So that's one key issue. There's also an element of communication. I think a lot of young people from the focus groups mentioned that although they know how to talk about climate, they don't necessarily possess the right communication frameworks nor the platforms to get their opinions and voices out there. And as we said before, also moving beyond the usual suspects and usual voices and trying to reach those the communities that are going to be most affected by climate change. And then one of the third ones, and this is something that comes up consistently, and I think this is also reflective of how civil society works within these institutional relationships between the EU and, for example, the AU. Young people obviously want greater access and simplified access to funding, and as well as capacity building to access funding. So those were some of the main outcomes. And if I still have a little bit of time, I wouldn't mind also sharing that, for example, researchers mentioned that they want to feel empowered to talk about their research through training and mentorship. They want to move their work from inside their laboratories, and they also want to spread awareness and reach a greater greater range of people, and also make, of course, that information digestible for those people. In terms of artists, they feel that they can obviously have a huge role in communicating climate, so to move kind of from the heart all the way to the hands approach. And they mentioned that they need greater access to funding, but of course greater spaces to actually showcase their work and discuss climate issues through different mediums. And for example, entrepreneurs mentioned, of course, capacity building, and obviously education, so they can actually start making initiatives or projects that can actually address climate change. And of course, the final element is, of course, facilitating partnership and cooperation between entrepreneurs. So I can share a little bit more later, but this just to say that once we came up with these recommendations, they were presented in the framework of the Africa-Europe Summit in Brussels to a broad range of policymakers, and we made the link between COP26 moving to COP27. So we had a representative from the European Commission, the Executive Vice President for the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, but then we also had people from the Egyptian government, from the UK presidency, as well as then specific climate experts from Africa and Europe. And we had a really successful discussion, and these recommendations and also the video you saw before were communicated to them. But of course, this is not the end of it. We're going to be now engaging with young people over the course of the next months to continue this discussion and make sure that we keep dialogue alive.
Yeah, about that, Chahaiya, because I mean, you mentioned such valuable input, I think, in that sense about there should be more seats available at the table, and also, well, you mentioned that you're going to work ahead in the upcoming months to see how you can get that youth voice represented. I wanted to ask you about that. Are you hopeful that the voice of young people will be more central and genuinely better heard around these key policymakers and decision-making processes in Brussels in the period ahead?
Well, I think we have to be hopeful because, I mean, especially if we look at the dialogue and the space for this dialogue, even up to 3 years ago, I mean, we see increasingly young people involved at institutional level. So, for example, if you look at what we have in Brussels, the European Commissioner for International Partnerships, she now has established a youth advisor. She has a youth sounding board, and equally, for example, some of the members of at the head of the Youth for Climate marches are now included in the cabinet as advisors to Frans Timmermans. So I am hopeful. We see spaces being created, but I don't think that we can kind of let go of the baton moving to COP27. We need to really make sure that we have consistent dialogue over the course of these months. And ideally, we would want to see young people actually included formally in this, let's call it leadership value chain. So for moving from all the way from the policies to the actual implementation. So ideally, I hope this COP is not going to just end at the youth COP and say, okay, that's done, but rather actually have it involved in the have young people involved in the overall delegations and discussions in the actual COP itself.
But it's good to see that there are positive trends, but indeed, as you say, we have to, use that as fuel to go even further and make sure that we get those voices represented in there. Chahaiya, thank you so much for sharing that with us. We also have Heeta with us, and Heeta, it's not just you joining us, for which we're very happy, but there are also a lot of policymakers in the audience watching this who might see the event afterwards, which is why I wanted to ask you, Heeta, assume there are 500, maybe 1,000 policymakers listening, what would the key message be that they need to hear?
Thank you, Hajar. I think for policymakers, there is one key message which they need to realize is we've been saying this over and over again, but we're running out of time. No matter how many times you say it, this is really the truth. We're running out of time to take action. We're creating a world that we're leaving on for generations to come. And we're really deciding today what that world is going to look like, whether generations to come are going to live in conflict, are going to move and become climate migrants, or have to live in a world that has clean air, water, and soil. So for any decisions that you're making today, I would request you to really look at the bigger picture at hand and see how this pieces together by the decisions that you make in this moment.
Definitely, and I mean, touching upon that, you know, the urgency and also the time that is such a crucial element when we talk about the climate emergency, right? We just spoke about, you know, hopefulness and optimism. How do you look at that, Heeta? Do you see positive trends towards the inclusion of young people within this discussion, or are there still a lot of obstacles that we need to overcome in order to really get meaningful youth participation?
I think it's a mix of both, right? There is change. There is a lot of more noise towards young people. There's also a lot of positive noise to really see how young people can be part of the change, how they can be part of these decision-making roles. Like Chahaiya mentioned, there are more and more youth councils. More people want to really work with young people in whatever roles that they're doing. But at the same time, we really need to understand how do you really meaningfully work with these young people? There is one thing to have them as part of advisory council, so on and so forth. But it's really another thing to give them the mic and say, okay, you can make the decision from here on. And that, I think, is still lagging a little bit. There is work, we're in the right direction, but we're not there yet. And there's a little bit of jump gap that we need to do to really make this happen.
Right. Thank you so much, Heeta. And I mean, that touches upon what you mentioned at the very beginning, right, Phoebe? You don't want to have a sort of tokenistic approach in which you include young people and you snap a nice picture and put it on Twitter afterwards to show to the world, but you really want it to be meaningful and have meaning in that sense. Thank you so much. Now, back to our green scholars, Lamis and Lidya, because, you know, we're moving on from now and we're moving towards COP27. So how do you make your mark on COP27, Lidya and Lamis?
Well, as Green Scholars, we hope for COP27 to be a place for co-leadership and co-decision making.
We need more policies that open for international discussions. We need more social actions and climate connections because to understand other countries' challenges toward this issue.
Yeah, and we hope it would also be inclusive for everyone to share their ideas and removing the financial obstacles for everyone to have a platform to share what they think about the climate change.
Thank you.
Clear, and thank you so much, Lidya and Lamis, for sharing those insights with us. Now, for the last question, I would love to turn to you, Phoebe. I mean, we spoke with Heeta just now, Chahaiya as well, about optimism, you know, being hopeful. And I want to ask you, are you optimistic that the voice of young people will be properly included during COP27? How do you look at that? And how do we move forward from here on out, would you say?
I think, honestly, I am optimistic about the involvement of young people in COP27. And that is uncharacteristic for me because I'm normally a very pessimistic person. But COP26, we had so many amazing commitments. There was the ACE work programme, which was agreed, which recognised young people as agents for change. It also encouraged governments to include young people as a part of their negotiating delegations. It was honestly both the governmental action where the COP president, Alok Sharma, was talking about the vital role of young people and the work that I was a part of, the Education Ministers Summit, and for different things on climate education, the involvement of young people in those presidency programs. I really see a good future for the role of young people in these platforms, both in the official capacity, but also what gives me hope is the grassroots presence at COP26. There was such a large movement of young people there. The power wasn't just in the negotiating rooms, it was out on the streets, and it was in basements of coffee shops. It was young people getting together, meeting each other for the first time in person ever. We'd all worked online, and meeting people and building coalitions in that way gives me so much hope for the future, because it gives me hope for that cultural exchange and for that dialogue and for those coalitions, which we desperately need when we're talking about climate change, because that's our solution. It's working across borders, it's working with loads of different people, it's working with people from different backgrounds and opinions and perspectives. It's working with people from different generations and including them within that space.
Right, definitely.
And that gives me hope.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a beautiful note for us to move forward on, right? And I love how you said that, you know, the actual power wasn't just happening at the negotiating table or in the hallways, but it was also, you know, in the basement of a cafeteria where people are joining on the streets, marching. So it's really about bringing everyone together in that sense. Thank you so much, Phoebe, and thank you to all our panelists. Amazing insights, I think, that we can use to move forward from here on out.